welcome back, listeners, to the Mindful Living podcast, where we are stepping into a conversation today that might just shift how you think about healing the brain. Now, imagine this in a world where we are conditioned to seek answers in pills, procedures, and pathology. Today's conversation invites us into a completely different paradigm, one where light itself becomes medicine. Joining us is Dr. Theodore A. Henderson. He's a distinguished physician scientist whose groundbreaking work in infrared light therapy, LUMIT, is changing lives and challenging long held assumptions in psychiatry and neurology. From PTSD and traumatic brain injury to chronic fatigue and depression, Dr. Henderson believes that we have often overlooked one of the most powerful healing tools nature has to offer, which is light. But that's not all, listeners. We are also going to dig into something even more controversial, the role of hidden viruses in mental health, and why current medicine may be missing the mark entirely. So, whether you are a caregiver, a curious mind, or someone walking your own healing path, I hope that this episode is definitely for you. So, with that, Dr. Henderson, welcome to the show, and I'm really, really honored to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. So, talking about LUMIT, Dr. Henderson, can you walk us through what it is and how exactly differs from the other forms of light therapy or neurostimulation treatments?
Absolutely. So it's all in the name. So LUMIT is an acronym. It's short for laser
Mhm.
unattenuated multiwatt infrared treatment. Now, what does that mean? So first off, probably the most important part is the U, the unattenuated. And what does that mean? The We're using multi-watt infrared light that has sufficient power to penetrate through the scalp and skull and reach the brain. Now, most infrared light therapies out there and devices that you can buy online and pay two, three, $4,000 for are using
Mhm.
half watt LEDs. So a half watt of infrared light will penetrate about a millimeter of skin. So it's not even going to get through your skin, let alone get to the scalp, which is thicker than skin, or through the skull, which is bone. And even if it was able to get to the surface of the brain, it's not going to get 3, 4 centimeters into the brain as our multi-watt infrared light does. So that's a huge distinction that we're able to make between these low power devices, which deliver a slight bit of improvement, whether we're treating autism or dementia or traumatic brain injury. The clinical studies have shown a little tiny bit of improvement, but
Mhm.
that improvement doesn't last. As soon as you stop doing the treatment on a daily basis, all those problems come back. And that's different with multi-watt infrared light, where we're treating patients. We had a 93% response rate for depression, and those patients remained undepressed for years. We started treating patients with traumatic brain injury 13 years ago. Every single one of those patients continues to do well to this day.
Mhm. And as you mentioned about multi-watt, I mean, this is the speciality in there. Um, why is this intensity of light so critical for therapeutic outcomes?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So,
Mhm.
what we know from the science, from the biology research that's been done at Harvard and other top research institutions, is that there's a window of light, a window of energy that is sufficiently powerful and not too powerful that can activate the mitochondria within cells. And when those mitochondria get activated, then all the good biological downstream effects happen. And I'll talk about those later. But just focusing on that little window of energy, you have to be able to get enough energy through the scalp and skull and into the brain and to the brain cells themselves within that window of energy to activate the photobiomodulation benefits. And that's what we worked out in the research lab. Back in 2013, we went into the research lab and figured out how much energy we had to deliver to the surface of the head in order to get through scalp and skull and 3 centimeters into the brain.
Mhm. Wow, that is really, really interesting. Really interesting. And Dr. Henderson, you have seen a remarkable success in treating veterans, first responders, and trauma survivors. So, what observations or what kind of shifts or breakthroughs that you have witnessed in your patients and have truly stayed with you?
Hmm. Well, one of the things I think that veterans, and I was talking to a veteran about this yesterday, and is that they go to the VA, and this is probably true in every country. They go to veterans services, and it's understaffed and underfunded, and it's using sort of outdated modalities in a lot of cases. So veterans with traumatic brain injuries are offered group therapy. And here in the US, there's a big fancy center that the Army has set up, and people go there for weeks of treatment, and they walk out of there, and the treatment is consisted of psychotherapy, group therapy, dog therapy, art therapy, nothing that actually physiologically helps the brain heal. And afterwards, to a person, these veterans say that the best thing they got out of it was the dog therapy. Now, dogs are
Yes.
wonderful. Not saying that that's a bad thing, but
Yeah.
it's not healing the brain. And what infrared light does is it turns on the brain's own ability to repair what's called neuroplasticity. Infrared
Mhm.
light, if it's of sufficient strength to get through the scalp and skull and reach the cells in the brain, activates the mitochondria, which turn on uh, genes within the chromosomes through various signals. And some of those genes are involved in reducing inflammation. That's why it helps in things like long COVID. But some of those genes turn on a growth factor called brain derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. Now, BDNF drives neuroplasticity in the adult brain, it drives brain repair. In other words, brain healing. And that's what, these veterans are not able to get. They're not able to get brain repair. They just get psychotherapy and they get pills and they get group therapy and maybe some dog therapy. And that's not what they need. Let me give you one really good example.
Mm.
This was a veteran, and he had both a brain injury and been very, very traumatized emotionally when his
Mhm.
ship was attacked. Um, at that point, it was 49 years ago at the time that he
Okay.
came to us for treatment. So he had suffered for 50 years. When a helicopter flew over the neighborhood or a jet flew over the city, he would be in the basement sobbing. That's how terrible his trauma was. And he had done that for 49 years. He came to us for treatment. 6 treatments. He had 6 treatments. Now, how many treatments a person needs really depends on the person. 20 to 30 is a good number to think of, but for whatever reason, on treatment 6, his life changed. And he said, "This is amazing. I got up off the table and I no longer had any of those fears. The helicopters fly over, he sits there and, does it. He keeps doing what he's doing. He's not bothered. He, maybe yawns. Uh, he's he's happy. And all that trauma that he'd carried around, that emotional post-traumatic stress disorder trauma that he'd carried around for 50 years was gone, just gone. That's what I think all of our veterans and all of our first responders, and in fact, everybody deserves that kind of
Absolutely.
healing.
Yeah. Because, traditionally we look at talk therapy or any other kind of, traditional way, then it may take a very, very long time. But six sessions, it's something really very fascinating and very, very interesting as well. Also, you mentioned that since with the multiwatt specialty and the infrared light, it works at the somatic level. So,
Mhm.
um, for the listeners who might feel like they have tried everything, what makes Lumit a fresh option? Not just another trend. Especially when people say that this will help you in reducing the effects of aging or gives you vitality, so it kind of becomes a trend, and the actual significance of the product or the whole technology kind of becomes
Mhm.
dilute.
Well, so in a way, that's two questions. One question is what makes Lumit different from, say, treatment as usual for, say, depression?
Yeah.
And the other is what makes Lumit, a cornerstone piece of a person's, search for longevity and vitality.
Hmm.
Let me answer the first one first, depression. So
Okay.
I'm board certified in psychiatry.
Hmm.
And, so I went through psychiatry residency, after medical school and heard the blah, blah, blah. Oh, yes, depression is due to not having enough serotonin in your brain. And you must take a serotonin reuptake inhibitor to increase the serotonin in your brain. You hear the mocking tone of my voice because it's nonsense. It's been the serotonin theory of depression has been completely disproven. Now, fluoxetine or Prozac in the US is, uh, is an SSRI, serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And, for a small portion of people, it helps their depression, but it helps
Mhm.
their depression by turning on neuroplasticity. Very weakly, very poorly in most people, but in, 17, 18, 20% of the population, it does turn on neuroplasticity, and that's helps their depression. So what we're doing with Lumit is we're saying, to heck with these pills that you have to take every day and that sort of kind of make you feel a little bit better. People are living a life of joy. They're living a life of okay or good enough. And
Mhm.
maybe they have side effects like they've lost their libido or they're gained, 30 pounds of weight they didn't really want to have to gain, or they're losing their hair because of the side effects of the medications, whatever. And we're saying, look, why don't we turn on neuroplasticity big time? Why don't we turn on neuroplasticity as much as we possibly can and activate the system that really repairs the brain fully? And
Mhm.
that's what infrared light does for us. So just a quick aside, I don't want to get bogged down in it, but ketamine has become a treatment for depression. And ketamine has nothing to do with serotonin. And in fact, the main reason ketamine works as an antidepressant is that it turns on BDNF by a different mechanism from infrared light, but it turns on BDNF and therefore neuroplasticity nonetheless. That I use ketamine as a model in the book I wrote, Brighter Days Ahead. Now, here's the interesting thing. Guess what happens when you put ketamine and infrared light together? You get a 1 plus 1 equals 3 kind of scenario. You get synergy. So we have patients with really severe depression, and we put infrared light and ketamine together, and they get much better. So just the idea of really radically approaching the treatment of depression and other psychiatric disorders. I've named PTSD and depression, but there are others, in a radically different way that doesn't involve pills, that results in, you know, not just health, but vitality and a joy of living, for years. Now, we've not changed the genes. So some people will have a recurrence of depression over time. But for a lot of people, they're living a life of joy maybe they're still on a small dose of an antidepressant, but it's much less than what they were taking in the past.
Right. Hmm.
Now, the other question was this vitality and longevity question, and that's a
Right.
whole different thing. So, one of the things that was discovered about 8, 9 years ago, I get really excited about this, is something called the glymphatic system in the brain. It's like the lymphatic system in our body. In other words, that's what drains away toxins. And so they just discovered this glymphatic system in the brain. Now, the glymphatic system drains toxins, and it drains toxins best during stage 4 sleep. It's like 4 to 5 times faster in clearing toxins or better in clearing toxins than in the waking state. Now, what happens when someone gets depressed or they get PTSD or they get a brain injury or they get dementia or they get long COVID or they get chronic fatigue syndrome? Their sleep just goes right out the window and they get very
Mm.
little stage 4 sleep. So they are progressively accumulating toxins that they cannot clear. Now,
Right.
there is a wavelength of infrared light that turns on toxin clearance by the glymphatic system. So you can literally get the benefit of stage 4 sleep just by getting this infrared light treatment.
Mm.
And so, again, it's gotta be strong enough. It's gotta be a multi-watt infrared light, not these little devices that they're selling on the internet. It's gotta be strong enough to get through the scalp and skull and reach the brain, but it can turn on that toxin clearance system. And we're seeing that in our patients with mild cognitive impairment and early dementia. They are getting better. They are getting cognitively better.
Mm. That is so interesting, Dr. Anderson. Very, very interesting. Oh.
And if you take it one step further, we
Okay.
all have toxins in our brains. I guarantee you I've got plenty of toxins in my brain. And if we are including infrared light therapy as a LUMIT therapy in particular, as a part of our regimen of health and vitality, we will literally extend our brain's life and our brain's health.
Mm, of course. Of course. Very, that's a very, very interesting observation and very interesting and I think very much needed use of the red light therapy.
Mm,
Um Now, because we also are yet to cover, how viruses may play an
mm,
overlook
mhm.
in mental health conditions. So, how exactly does this work, Dr. Anderson? Because this is something which I can associate with COVID,
Mhm.
and then why do you think the medical community has been slow to accept this idea?
Well, partly it's really the fault of the doctors themselves. I'm gonna pick on doctors a little bit. It's so often that you know, either my patients or other people's patients will bring in an article or bring in a book for to share with their doctor, and the doctor's response is, doctors don't have time to read. And, I happen to be the guy who gets up every morning and reads, about a 1-inch stack of research papers because that's who I am. I believe in constantly learning, but a lot of my colleagues, they learned their stuff in medical school and that's it. So they learned in medical school, for example, that Epstein-Barr virus, which is one of the herpes viruses, it's also the cause of mononucleosis. It's herpes 4. Um, they learned that you get, an Epstein-Barr infection, you have mononucleosis, and it never bothers the person again. Now, there's a problem with that. Herpes 3 is also part of the herpes family. It's called varicella. It's the cause of chickenpox. And everybody knows chickenpox. Worldwide, everybody gets chickenpox as a kid.
Yeah.
And then decades later, maybe in their 60s or their 70s, the chickenpox virus wakes up and causes shingles. Now,
Oh.
how is that possible? How can herpes 3, and the whole medical community accepts this. In fact, they've made a vaccine against herpes 3 because, gosh, we don't want people to get shingles.
Mm.
But they ignore the fact that herpes 3 has the same life cycle as herpes 4, as herpes 5, as herpes 6, as herpes 7 and 8 and 1 and 2. And I mean, there are 12 herpes viruses that affect human beings. They all have the same life cycle. They cause an acute infection and then they cause a chronic um, infection that is dormant. And at any time, that dormant infection can reactivate and cause a problem. Now, in the case of herpes 4, the Epstein-Barr virus, that acute infection is mono. But what's the chronic infection? Well, the chronic infection has, for years, we've known as chronic fatigue syndrome. And the most common cause of chronic fatigue syndrome is Epstein-Barr virus. But the medical community refused to acknowledge that and refused to, and would laugh me out of meetings. And yet it was treating patients with chronic fatigue syndrome with antivirals, and they were getting better. And here's the interesting thing. Not only did they get better from their fatigue, but the
Mhm.
ones who had seizure disorders stopped having seizures. The ones who had depression or anxiety stopped having depression or anxiety. And so the viruses, in fact, were causing not just fatigue, but also depression, anxiety, seizures. I have patients who were diagnosed with Parkinson's disease by Parkinson's disease neurologists, experts in their field. And when, I had gotten a brain scan, so I knew that there was something amiss in their brain, which wasn't Parkinson's, and I treated them with antivirals. Not only did their brain function improve, but their Parkinson's symptoms went away, leaving the neurologist scratching his head saying, well, gosh, I guess you didn't have Parkinson's after all, which is amazingly, I'm sorry to say, a stupid thing for a neurologist to say. He should have said, wow, I need to learn about this, but they didn't. Now, that becomes very relevant in today's post-COVID world because now we have long COVID.
Yeah.
And one of the things that long COVID is, it's multiple things. One of the things that it is a reactivation of herpes viruses, in particular, Epstein-Barr virus and herpes 6. So that
Mm.
cytokine storm that caused all that chaos when people had COVID, well, it is a huge immune system stress. And what causes shingles? Stress, right? People get old, their immune system gets weak, or they're going through a divorce, or they're starting a new job, or they got fired, whatever the emotional stress is, whatever the physiological stress is, that sets off shingles. In other words, when the immune system gets weak, the herpes viruses can reactivate. And so in the case of COVID, the cytokine storm reactivated Epstein-Barr and herpes 6 in people's brains. And for example, just this week in the clinic, I've evaluated 3 patients with long COVID. 2 out of 3 were positive for Epstein-Barr virus. 2 out of 3.
Wow. Those three. That is wild. That is wild. So definitely this is unsettling, but kind of it's also empowering because this idea that depression or anxiety might originate from a viral footprint rather than just trauma genetics. That is really, really, I mean, it's good to know.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
powerful to know.
And if you take it a couple of steps further,
Mm.
we've got a vaccine to shingles. Why can't we make a vaccine to Epstein-Barr virus? In fact, literally one exists sitting in the vaults at NIH. So we could actually make a vaccine, think about it, against depression, against chronic fatigue. Wow.
Right.
And
Sure.
if we take it one additional step, one of the things that Ruth Ezaki, who's in England, showed is that herpes 1, the cold sore virus, causes Alzheimer's disease. And some additional studies out of Tufts University really gave the mic drop experiments that proved definitively that herpes 1, if you infect a petri dish of newborn brain cells with herpes 1 virus, within days, they develop all the pathology of Alzheimer's disease. So we literally could make anti a, um, a vaccine against Alzheimer's disease. Holy Toledo.
Yeah. Oh. Oof. I mean, yeah, that is absolutely, absolutely challenging and a bit of a personal question, Dr. Henderson. You bring your own story of childhood adversity into your work.
Mhm.
Um, how has your lived experience shaped your understanding of trauma and the possibilities of healing?
Well, I think what really happened for me,
Mhm.
was that, number 1, um, I read the book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and it spurred me to believe that what we accept as fact is probably wrong. And so as a scientist, I've always kind of pushed on the barriers of, "Oh, this is how things are." In other words, I'm somewhat like Don Quixote. I'm not afraid to tilt at windmills. I'm not afraid to challenge, the norm of thinking. And the second thing that happened was that I decided that my way to deal with trauma was to help other people learn to deal with their trauma. And so you know, I as a medical student, I started a child abuse prevention task force in St. Louis, and we were teaching kids about how to keep themselves safe. Um,
Okay.
you know, that was healing for me to shift my knowledge from just a painful experience to something that could be helpful.
Wow. So it's like you are using your moments of pain and suffering to empower others
Mhm.
and then empower yourself as well. So it's like a constant source of empowerment.
There we go.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Great, great, Dr. Henderson. So, of course, if our listeners they would like to connect with you, explore more about LUMIT, and also get access to your wonderful resources and your new book as well, what will be the best way?
Well, I think the best place to start is our website, and that's www.healmybrain.info. Healmybrain.info. Now, I mean, the full URL is neuroluminance.com, but nobody can spell neuroluminance, so let's go with
With
healmybrain.info.
you. Yeah.
And of course, my book is available on Amazon. And, one of the things that everyone who's read my book, who's talked to me about it, and maybe they're just flattering me, but I don't, I think not. They say that it's a page turner, and which is an odd thing for a medical book to be, but I think what I write are stories of inspiration. There's a lot of examples of my patients in the book and their fight to get to health, and
Mhm.
the joy and the life of peace and joy that they were able to achieve.
Wonderful, wonderful. And the consultations that you're providing through your website, so are they available globally or virtually, or these can be only physical consultations?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So
Yeah.
I've got a international reputation in the world of chronic fatigue syndrome. And so I have patients on every continent in the world except for Antarctica. So if you have any listeners down in Antarctica who happen to have chronic fatigue or something else that they'd like to talk to me about, I would love to be able to put a pin in that part of the map. So, yes, people can reach out to me, and I can do virtual, consultations, and what I typically do internationally is, I partner up with their primary care doc locally to, get the medications to them, but I provide the expertise through consultation.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Brilliant. I'll make sure to have all the details and links in the show notes. Dr.
That's great.
Anderson.
Thank you so much.
This was such a wonderful, noble, and so insightful discussion because I think accessibility definitely should be there for everyone. Everyone should get accessibility and equal chance at trying this out.
Absolutely. Oh,
Aware about the wonders of light therapy and LUMIT as well. And you definitely reminded us, doctor, that healing doesn't always have to come from what's synthetic or prescribed or even expected. So thank you.
oh. Yeah. No, just, so we are working on, creating collaborations, in Europe at this point, and, I was just over, in Prague, not too long ago, meeting with, a variety of groups,
Hmm.
and we certainly hope to be able to do that. And our foundation, which is the Neuro Laser Foundation, is, uh, has been working since the beginning of the war in Ukraine to get, the groundwork laid so that we can open and or train clinicians in Ukraine after the war is over in order to be able to treat because, besides all the people with concussive brain injuries, there's all these people who have trauma and all these people who have lost loved ones and, have that trauma and that depression that comes with that sort of mourning. So, we're one step closer to making that a reality, which is a huge aspiration for the foundation and for me to make those kinds of differences.
Commendable. That's really commendable, Dr. Henderson.
Oh, thank you.
Ah, great. So, listeners, I hope that today's conversation has sparked curiosity within you because it definitely did within me. It has challenged your beliefs or give you hope. Take a moment to explore Dr. Henderson's work and also his new book, Brighter Days Ahead. I'll make sure to have all the links in the show notes along with the details and information about the consultations he's providing. And if you are navigating the long road of healing, may today's message be a gentle, quiet reminder that you're not broken, you are healing. Until next time, this is your host, Sana, and this is The Mindful Living. Thank you.